Hi, I'm Gordon McCall, and this is Cars and Culture with Jason Stein.
Well, we can't have a conversation about cars or culture without having Gordon McCall in the program. You are the epitome of both. Gordon, it is great to be with you again. How are you?
I'm doing great, Jason. Thank you, and likewise. What a treat! It's been a while since we've spoken, and it's great to see you.
Great to see you. It's great to be with you. And I want to start off with the cultural element of the cars and culture part of the program. And that is to say that you just have returned from one of the more iconic cultural events globally. Tell me about Goodwood in 2022. How
Oh,
good was Goodwood?
oh my gosh, it was. It should be called Great Wood.
Greatwood.
Yeah, Jason, it's one of those things. It really is the high watermark in terms of celebrating all things automotive, motorcycle, lifestyle, everything associated with it. The Duke of Richmond puts on the most amazing show twice a year with the Festival of Speed, which just wrapped up last weekend. And then in the fall, he's got the Revival, which is in period costume, etc. It's incredible who comes to that event. It's 200,000 spectators
Mm.
and virtually everybody and anybody who's in the automotive world, primarily in the racing scene, but also on the design side as well. And to your cultural point, it just epitomizes that. It's being lived and breathed
Yes.
right in front of you. Dinner at the Goodwood House is surreal. He has a 200 person kind of an intimate, for lack of a better word, in the house sit down dinner on the Friday night, followed up by 1600 on Saturday night with entertainment, etc. And you just run into people that you've read about your entire
Mm.
life, that type of thing. It's a must do. And so many things have been kind of geared around what the Duke of Richmond has established there. You'll hear in the spirit of Goodwood, you hear that often. It's impossible to not be inspired by what he's created there. It's incredible, really
Why
is.
does it work the way that it does, Gordon?
Well, I think authenticity, genuineness, and a 12,000 acre estate that was built in the 1600s. I don't think that hurts. Just the history of the property, between the motor circuit, the hill climb, which I believe was established in 1936, just prior to World War II. It was an active, it's where they flew Spitfires off of for World War II. The history is there. It's real. You don't have to look for it. You don't have to imagine it was there. You can see it. It's just right there. And I think that has a lot to do with they always talk about the ambiance of the room. Well, this is the ambiance of the estate. It's steeped in history. Not to mention the Rolls-Royce factory that's there now.
And the return really for everybody now in this year in almost a post-COVID type of atmosphere as well. And I know that you dealt with this as well during the last couple of years, but the car world really missed each other, didn't it, during the course of those last 2 years? Not just the events, but the people, the stories, the personalities
Yeah.
was was the missing factor.
Jason, you're absolutely right. I've always contended that the car world, I also equate this to vintage motorcycles as well, of which I'm very involved in also. But I've always viewed that neither one of these passions are enjoyed in a vacuum. They just aren't. It's no fun just to go into your garage and tinker on your stuff, and that's it. That's typically not
Yeah.
why any of us are into this. We're all into this because of the people that we have the pleasure of being in contact with through our passions. And it seems like the cars are almost the unintended consequence of it all. And so getting together, I think, has rejuvenated a lot of spirits. It's really lifted a lot of people. And I personally, I've never been with that many people. In the last couple of years, it was literally 50,000 people a day. And people that were needing to be cautious were cautious, and people that felt comfortable were comfortable. And we're back is kind of that's the feeling that I certainly had with a
Well,
nice.
back indeed, and you're back as well. And the Quail will be full force this year.
Yep.
How much can you draw from Goodwood and borrow from Goodwood to apply to what you do in August in Monterey?
Well, I suppose we're all inspired by things. I've been a photographer my whole life, and I always kind of view things through somewhat of a photographer's eye. I need to back up just quickly to say that yes, okay, I'm the referred to as the co-founder of the Quail Show and all of that, which is now 19 years old. But really, what makes that show what it is the Peninsula Signature Events Department at the Quail Lodge and Golf Club. There's a full-time office staff run by Courtney Ferrandi. That's what they do year round. I'm kind of that car guy that gets to go in once a week for 4-hour meetings and talk about various displays, cars, entrance, etc. But they're the ones that do the heavy lifting that make that show what it is. So I always like to kind of preface
Sure.
whatever I say about that. But 19 years ago, when I came up with this idea of an all-inclusive ticket where everyone is treated as a VIP and we take the pressure of the judging off the table, that came a lot from my 28 straight years that I was with the Pebble Beach Concours, which I have nothing but the utmost respect for. But I did start to see things changing in that show world in a way that it affected me. When I look at cars and tinker on cars, Jason, I think of them as being just nothing but a pleasure. It's we don't have to be doing any of this stuff with these vintage cars, right?
Right.
It should be fun. And I'm not saying that concours aren't fun, but there is a certain level of stress. And I started witnessing it. I was almost starting to feel it, as a judge at Pebble. It was like, wow, these people are really stressing out over what's going on here with the guys in the blue blazers and the straw hats telling them what's wrong with their cars. And I just thought, oh gosh, I think there might be something that we can do that complements this. It's not certainly an instead of. That was never my intention, and that's not what it is. But just the idea of maybe looking at the lifestyle element a little bit closer, so that the cars are, yes, very important, but what's equally or perhaps more important are all those personal relationships and interactions. And that's really what defines the Quail. It's about the people, it's about the hospitality. It's about the fact that everybody's a VIP and you don't have to worry about what kind of wristband you have on, and it's worked, thankfully to the huge effort of the Peninsula Signature Events Department. 19 years later, no one else is really doing it like that still.
Yeah, you've cornered the market on all of that, and you've cornered the market on the stories that are told during that day as well. And you've said before, it's the stories and the people behind them that make it interesting, not necessarily just the cars. We all love the cars,
Of course.
but and the story that you and the team create around that day, you said it. You're viewed as the benchmark event to Car Week.
Which
Pretty
is
incredible.
which is really interesting. There's a lot for people to do. I take great pride, Jason. I'm from here. I've lived here. My wife and I are both. We've lived here our entire lives, and it's really gratifying to have a hand in these events that people come from all over the world to. Monterey Peninsula is a pretty magical place. Doesn't hurt to have a world-class racetrack and the beauty of the coastline and facilities such as the Quail Lodge and Golf Club.
Right.
It's not a bad place to be doing these things. That's for sure.
It's kind of like the Duke of Richmond's property. I mean, right? You've got your own Duke of Richmond
Yeah, in a way,
scenario.
we do. Yeah, that's true.
You mentioned it. You're a teenager from the area who hid his motorcycle in a friend's garage, because you didn't want anybody to know, your parents possibly to know. And as a high school student, you swept the floors of a local Ferrari dealership.
Yeah.
Pretty incredible stuff. Did you ever think you'd end up where we are today?
I had no clue. I knew what I loved. I was good enough in school. I think this is an everyman story here. There's so many of us went through this exact same thing. I had to get good grades in order to play sports. So I don't want to say I wasn't learning anything at the time, but my goal was to get the good grades so I could continue to play baseball. But
Right.
then I got immediately distracted when I bought my first motorcycle at 14. And my life changed with that motorcycle. It really did. And that dumb little bike, as you said, I did hide it from my mom. It was an unauthorized purchase and all the rest of that. But then again, that's a common story. This is nothing new.
Yeah, we've heard this before from people on this program,
I'm sure you have. And it won't be
including
the
Bruce
last.
Meyer.
There you go. Yeah. There is that common thread that tends to weave us all together. But it's funny, Jason, that motorcycle really taught me everything that I needed to know in life. It taught me how to kind of bend the rules, but without any, collateral damage from it. I
Right.
wasn't hurting anybody, right? I was a little bit, taller than most for my age. So if I wore a dark shield, I could ride this motorcycle around, but I couldn't get in trouble. If I got in trouble, it was over. The gig was over. I also had to learn how to work on stuff. And so, that led me to literally, they'd have to kick me out of the Ferrari dealership. I'd take the bus over to the Monterey Ferrari dealer and just clean up. I mean, there isn't a shop around that will kick somebody out that's cleaning up the mess.
That's
And
true.
that led to, essentially a career in the car world. And I had no idea. I just knew I was surrounding myself with stuff I was really interested in. And I hope that that's something that, young folks are still interested in doing, I had a funny conversation. It's a bit of a tangent, but one of the people that I met at Goodwood this last week was this guy named Tony Fidel. And Tony is credited with
Oh, former Apple,
exactly, yeah. Tony's
iPod.
he's the creator of the iPod and or iPad and co-creator of the iPhone. And he was, a really nice guy. And anyway, so we were chatting up in the Duke's house, and he said something like, "Can you imagine what life would have been like during the shutdown if we didn't have the iPhone?" We were talking about anniversaries, and apparently the iPhone is 15 years old now.
Right.
It's kind of remarkable, right? And I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, gosh, can you imagine, Tony? Kids going outside, playing in the trees and the dirt, getting their shins skinned up." And I thought, oh, I think I may have said the wrong thing. But he laughed and then he paused and he goes, "You know what?" He goes, "I just did an article about how I hope things can switch back the other way." And the way I'm tying this together is I hope kids never, as important as these devices are, I hope they never lose that interest in wanting to learn how things work and how to fix things with your hands, and meet people that make things that, not just virtually,
Yeah. Well
So
said.
I'm glad those distractions weren't there for me back then, because I probably would have been all over the devices,
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
T-
there's my,
future guest on this program, Tony Hawk,
yeah.
apparently is building skateboard parks around the country because his read is that 13% of children play outside these
That's
days.
ridiculous.
13%.
Yeah.
And
So wouldn't you say growing up, it was 13% stayed inside?
yeah,
Maybe that many?
and 90 and 87% dreamt about cars and wanting to work on cars and wanting to drive their first car.
Yeah. So true. So true. Couldn't get me out of the house fast enough and to the DMV to my first car, and I was gone.
1969 BMW 2002 was yours.
Yeah. So actually, my first car was a 510 Datsun.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah, I had a 510 Datsun, which had everything to do with Peter Brock and his dominant BRE race team with John Morton behind the wheel. I was a volunteer out at Laguna Seca Raceway, and I was pumping fuel into race cars, and the 2.5 Challenge was taking place in the Trans Am, which I interestingly now run a 2.5 Trans Am 510. But Pete's whole presence just blew me away, and I ended up. We're friends now, and that's kind of surreal. I mean, there's a lot of Walter Mitty stuff that takes place in this car world, Jason.
There is.
It's really crazy who you end up crossing paths with, and where they're all just people. That's the thing that's I find so interesting about these icons in the business is they're all just people.
Is it true you learned to drive maybe on that BMW?
I did. I did.
Yes.
I learned how to drive on. Yeah, I had a stepfather with a '69 2002. I think it was one of the first 2002s on the Monterey Peninsula, and yeah, I learned how to drive on that car. So yeah, you're absolutely right with that fact. Yep, you've
No.
done some homework here, by the way.
Well, we like to get to know our guests a little bit. So speaking of, how in the world, and I mean, tell us a little bit about the pathway to getting where you are today. When we go from that Ferrari shop floor, how do we end up where we are now?
I believe me, I wish I could just say, well, it's because I had this master plan, and this is, the best way for me to describe it is I just continued to follow my passion. I learned a lot about business. I had a lot of really, it's funny. Being an athlete my whole life, I've learned the lesson early about how important it is to whatever it is you're into, put yourself in a situation where the people around you are better than you are. you will learn to be a better player. I don't care what the sport is if you're playing with people that are better than you. And the same can be said in the business arena. And I just felt very fortunate to be around people that were, highly motivated, highly successful people, and I learned a lot from them. And I just kept kind of swinging from branch to branch, just finding things that were of interest to me. And I have to admit, having a very supportive wife at home. Molly has been, my most incredible experience in my life is the support, and that's important. I think is, growing up, I didn't get a lot of that from my parents. For instance, my father died when I was very young, so I wasn't getting pushed at home, and as a kid. But to be an adult and have a supportive better half, Molly's just been amazing, just encouraging me. Yeah, go for it, go for it. There's no limitations here. Just go, just keep going, and that's really helped me a lot. Really has.
Most of your fellow car guys got their interest from their father. And as you just mentioned, you were just 8 when he passed away in 1965. But interestingly, full credit to your mother, the following year, she starts dropping you off on Highway 68 near this little place called Laguna Seca Raceway.
Yeah.
And you weren't allowed to walk in and visit the track, or you were allowed as long as you were back by 5 o'clock. So
Yeah.
now all of a sudden you're getting, I mean, full credit to your mother for agreeing
Yeah.
to do that, first of all,
Yeah. Yeah. No
and
kidding.
you're
Yeah.
hanging around the track all the time, right?
Well, and full credit to that time in our life where a parent could do that with their kid. Can you
Yeah,
imagine
so
doing
true.
that today? Yeah, just trek up the hill, up and over. There's only 40,000 people in there watching a Can-Am race, but just be back here, just be back here at dark. Uh,
Right.
so that was something that I appreciate her courage as well as her trust for knowing that I was never one to want to disappoint my mom, so I was always on time. And but what I learned during that period, and then here it is, just surreal. I'm on the Laguna Seca Raceway Foundation board. It's again, a lot of things just come full circle, and that's certainly another part of my life that has.
Let's go back to the Quail for a moment. You mentioned 19 years.
Yeah.
And this is an experience for guests that goes just beyond looking at vehicles. I mean, you have themes that are already set for this year. It'll be the 50th anniversary of BMW's M division. You'll do all things Mini Cooper,
Yep.
70 years of Jaguar and their wins at Le Mans. And then we get into some really interesting stuff. And this is where I want to focus on the Quail being very different than a lot of other
Sure.
concours or shows that exist around the country. You have pre-war sports and racing, you have post-war sports, you have the evolution of the supercar and the times that I've been there, the great Ferraris that are there. And of course, the show is more than just about a Ferrari GTO as an
Right.
example,
Right.
but also the custom coachwork. I mean, there's so much interesting and unique models that exist on the field that I don't know that there's another place that I've been, Gordon, that would have the same kind of eclectic collection. It's almost like it's like walking into your own personal garage, which we will talk about, or the garage of a Bruce Meyer or a
Right.
Rick Hendrick
Mm.
or any of those folks. The best from all different eras. Tell me about the philosophy around that.
It's really simple, and eclectic, the word you just used, is really the definitive word of what you'll see at that show. And it's been like that for me since day one. For some reason, Jason, I have never had a problem viewing things through everyone's eyes. There's a lot of car guys will get somewhat cornered into what their interest is. You're a Porsche guy, or you're a Ferrari guy, or a Chevy guy, or whatever it might be, right? I certainly have my own personal interests, but I appreciate, the whole gamut, the whole. I think it's really cool to see people just get incredibly excited about things like custom coachwork cars. They may not be your cup of tea, but you look at some of these things. I know Rick Dorr has brought cars to us over the years. You look at some of that handcrafted stuff and you think, this car is ever as much as interesting as a GTO Ferrari. And if you talk to the guy that built it, he's actually a little bit closer to the car than the guy that wrote the check for the, no disrespect, for the
Right.
GTO, and to me, that's what makes the event interesting, is those stories behind these people. It was really funny. We had a Triumph Spitfire there one year, and I was kind of mocked a little bit by some friends for what is a Spitfire doing at the Quail, right? It was really the story. It was owned by an Air Force serviceman. It was his father's car. His father had passed away. He'd restored the car to absolute perfection. I mean, it was a 100-point Spitfire, if there's such a thing, if you can imagine, right? No
Right.
disrespect to Spitfires, but it's not the first car you think of when you think of 100 points, right? Uh, Story behind that car. I thought this guy, his love for that car and the connection that that car means to him in relationship to his father, that's priceless in my book. And there he is on our show field telling that story and sharing that car with, anyone that has an interest in it. He was getting asked questions all day long, and I thought that's what it's all about. It's about diversity, and it's not just big, heavy duty, valuable cars. We all know what those are, and they'll be there. But I think it's fun to balance it out with whimsical stories. I mean, the All Things Mini. I mean, that's just lighthearted. But then you look at the Mini Cooper, they weren't so lighthearted. I mean, they won the Monaco Rally. They
Right. Right.
impressive weapons, but yet people look at them and they smile. Like the year we had the Volkswagen buses on our road activation. I think we had about 10 significant, I mean, really early, really rare, the kind of thing you don't expect to see during Car Week. That's what we love bringing to the table at the Quail, is to see something you just didn't expect to see that in August in Monterey.
Well, and isn't it interesting too? I've seen through the years the opportunity for automakers to launch vehicles at the Quail. I
Yeah,
mean, that newly launched vehicles or a first time launch
yeah,
appears at a car show. I mean, traditionally, those would have been reserved for the Genevas, the
industry.
Detroits, the New Yorks, and
Yeah,
now all of a sudden, I might see something that I've never seen before, brand new.
yeah,
And yet, in the middle of the field, you'll have, I know, a vehicle near and dear to your heart, but a Datsun.
yeah,
And that is that mix. It is
yeah.
old, it is new, it's traditional, it's classic, it's all of that wrapped in one.
Jason, I think, and you're absolutely spot on. And I think what we've done over the years is we've brought essentially a new platform for these OEMs. Like you said, it was to the press at specific industry events, right? And I wouldn't consider Monterey Car Week necessarily an industry event. I mean, there's certainly elements of it that are,
Yeah, it's become that.
but it's an end user. It's a lot of end users, a lot of everybody's best customers. The 100,000 or so people that flock to the Monterey Peninsula are everybody's best customer. And so what we've done is managed to provide this platform. So not only are these cars being launched through the media outlets, which all the important ones are there, but there's also people there that are going to buy what they see.
Yeah, right. They're going to write the check.
They're going to write the check, and that's important. And if you can actually streamline that process of, they don't even have to read the story about it because they just heard about it from the CEO of the company that was on the platform identifying this new car. It all started, that whole maneuver or movement started back, when was this? When the Panamera was launched. A good
Yeah.
friend of mine, Trevor Bleedorn at the time, was doing the PR in the States for Porsche. And our good friend at Auto Week, Mark Vaughn, had come up with a nickname for the Panamera before anybody had even seen it. I think there were a few press cars out, and the car was being nicknamed the Butster before anybody saw it. Not exactly what the manufacturer was hoping for, I'm sure, but everybody had
Chris
nine.
Bangle can relate.
Exactly, and not everybody. No one has forgotten the 928. And
Right.
that launch is like, oh my God, all the air cooled people are going nuts right now. Well, all of a sudden now there's a 4-door 911. It's like, wait a minute, this is definitely the answer to the question no one has asked. Well, I mentioned to Trevor, I said, you guys, I'm a Porsche guy. I've had 911 since I was 19 years old. I love the brand, but you guys are having problems with this car. Got this crazy idea. You really can't take in the aesthetic effects of that car when you're driving it.
Right.
so so let's try and figure out a way to get people in these cars. Is there a way you could get some pre-production prototypes out to Monterey? We've got this farm field. We could build out a Zentrum center. Send some wheels and tires. I'll come up with a route. You could use various events throughout the peninsula as a way to book test drives. And they went for it. I was kind of
And
surprised.
lo and behold, you can't even get in the cars because there's so many people interested.
Well, yeah, and so what happened, and I love these numbers. So they booked 1,100, so they had 41 cars delivered, pre-production, no VIN number, whatever you call them. They're not prototypes, but they're going to get crushed eventually. They're press cars, right? So they send them out. They send out a crew of mechanics to change brake pads and tires. They set up for the entire week. They booked 1,100 test drives, and they sold 236 of those cars. It changed everything. Then that word experiential marketing was discovered. And I'm not taking credit for this because it was a true collaboration, but that didn't exist before we did that at Quail. It really didn't. And so now every OEM, all they want to do is drives. It's like get the people behind the wheel. Doesn't matter what the car is, get them, let them drive it. That's
Compared to previous car shows where you couldn't even open the door
you couldn't
of
even
most
open.
vehicles.
You had to pry your way past the Las Vegas showgirl to get to the car, right? And now it's all they want to do is everybody wants to send cars to events. Hey, can you line up some VVIPs for us? We'd like them to use our cars. It's a different way of selling cars now, that's for sure. But we did that years ago at the Quail. It was pretty cool.
Wow, groundbreaking.
Yep.
And let me give you full credit here because last November a little known fact was announced, which I know you know, and that is that the Quail a Motorsports Gathering won the 2021 Concours of the Year award at the
Wow.
Historic Motoring Awards, which was at the Rosewood Hotel in London, England.
Yeah.
And that had to have been a bit of a crowning moment for you as well. I mean, especially during, post-pandemic things of that nature.
Yeah, I have to admit when I learned of the news, I had that personal moment of, wow, that's really neat. But I have to say, and this isn't patronizing whatsoever, just super proud of the team, the Peninsula Signature Events team, the Peninsula Hotels buy-in of, it's their event, they own it. I may have created it, but it's because of them that show is what it is today, and I'm just super proud and happy for them. There's a lot of hard work that takes place um, behind the scenes, and it's an amazing thing. It really is. I have to admit that was a crowning moment for sure.
Tell me a little bit, some other news over the course of the last year or so, or certainly since I saw you last. Tell me about the impact of Haggerty and the ownership that has taken place and what that means for you, for the things that you do.
Well, McKeel Haggerty is a very, very dear friend, and he has been for years. So, for 30 years, my wife Molly and I have produced an event at the Monterey Jet Center referred to as McCall's Motorworks Revival. And it's funny, Jason. We the last couple of years, it's a very personal thing. We innovated. I didn't realize this at the time. It's funny you ask, where did all this stuff start and everything? I can't put my finger on it. I just do these things, right? Well, I didn't realize that 30 years ago we had innovated this concept of bringing aviation and automotive interests together. I figured out back then that we're talking about the same person. The demographics are they're spot on. People that are into vintage cars are into airplanes, and it's 1 degree of separation. So here we create this event that turns out to be the kickoff event. We're hosting 3,000 people every year, and
The Wednesday night of Car Week.
Wednesday night of Car Week. And what ended up happening just the last couple of years, so my wife and I, we don't have kids, and I don't have a succession plan in terms of, a son or a daughter that I can hand the keys to and say, okay, guys, it's your turn now. And so we started talking about what can we do with this event? Well, as most people in the car world are aware of now, Haggerty has gone public. They've been buying events. They bought Amelia Island. They bought Greenwich Concours. They bought the California Melee, Concours of Americas. So they came to us with some ideas, and it fit. And it needed to. We've had offers in the past from people that did not fit. Very tempting, in terms of exit strategies. Very tempting, but that name had our event on it, or that event had our name on it for 30 years. And there's a lot of pride involved in that. And the idea of trusting its future to someone, it really needed to be the right fit. And there is no better fit than Haggerty. They've hired us back, so we're consulting with them. in terms of this transition. They've changed the name to Motorlux now. They've added an auction, which I did in the early 2000s. I used to run Christie's, the car department for Christie's. So I used to have an auction in conjunction with our Wednesday night event. We had a Thursday night sale. Well, they're going back to that. They've got Broad Arrow Auctions, of which they're a partner in. And it's exciting. It's exciting. And for us, it's like, oh, I can take a deep breath now. When I think about it, neither my wife or I have had a summer to speak of for like the past 45 years.
Wow.
I got
Wow.
I got involved at Pebble when I was a junior at Carmel High School, and it's been every summer has been a commitment, which I still obviously have with Quail and will remain. But it's the pressure of producing the Jet Center is off of our shoulders, and
Hmm.
we're there to help support them to succeed moving forward. So we're thrilled. We're absolutely thrilled.
Well, congratulations again.
Thank you.
Let's,
And that can't always be said. I have to back up on that. It doesn't always work out. You hear, and it's usually with what people won't say after the fact. But just in full transparency, we're just absolutely comfortable and confident with the direction that they're taking things.
well, speaking of jets, we can hear jets in the background of
Yeah,
where
yeah,
you're
yeah.
seated today.
Planes that decided to come in. Sorry about that.
No, no problem at all. Well, let me ask you generally, car shows, maybe on a global basis, and also I would say the kinds of shows that occur during Car Week. Where do they fit into the culture of the automotive world today?
I think this one-on-one experience that we were talking about earlier, I think interacting with fellow enthusiasts, it's one thing to read about, a particular car thing, entity, event. It's another thing to experience it, especially with friends and colleagues, et cetera. And there's something about that hands-on process that I think makes car shows extremely relevant. I find for myself, just personally, when I go to a show, which obviously I just did at Goodwood, I love seeing things that I didn't know existed. And that doesn't happen. I mean, I suppose it can on the internet. If you spend enough time searching, you're going to find stuff you didn't know existed. But, it's one thing to discover that, but it's another thing to talk to the people behind it and learn. I mean, it's a constant state of learning. And I find shows tend to do that. They inspire you to dig deeper, you know.
Are you saddened by the fact that some car shows that, and I'm thinking of Detroit here as an example, or Geneva. There
Yeah,
hasn't been a Geneva auto show
no,
since March of 19,
yeah,
unbelievably, and it's always been a staple in the calendar, whether it was an industry event or whether it was partially public. I mean, it was both. But are
yeah.
you saddened with what's happened? And I would argue that there's been some confusion in terms of what a car show needs to be. Not yours, not
Right.
what happens during Car Week, but in other car shows in general. What's your point of view?
Well, yeah, so I think getting back to the internet, I think a lot of things have changed. I mean, look at what's happening with the way people are going to be buying new cars, shortly. I mean, it seems like inventory is this whole business of car lots not having any cars. I think people are going to be ordering their cars soon over the internet, and the idea of going to a car dealer and picking one of 600 cars in stock those days. You know what it is, Jason? It's just change is really what it comes down to. It's just things are changing, and do we miss things like Geneva? Of course, but there was a time when Geneva didn't exist. When that show didn't exist, and so I think it's just evolution. It's change. I think people's tastes and interests do change. Things that work seem to continue to work. There's always something new. That to me is intriguing. That there is always something that pops up. Um, I think that's one of the things that I gravitate towards the vintage motorcycle world. The vintage motorcycle world reminds me of the vintage car world of about 30 years ago, where people didn't talk about how much stuff was worth. That's usually the last thing in the conversation.
Right.
But I think auctions. I mean, look what happened. Look what happened in the auction world during the COVID shutdown. People thought it was the end of the world, right? Instead, car sales went through the roof, and they're still going through the roof. People are buying.
Well, and Car Week should be one of the biggest auction weeks
Yeah,
on record coming up.
yeah. Well, I mean, look at Randy Nonenberg and Bring a Trailer. I mean, so when people couldn't travel, and there were a lot of people suffering and struggling, and still are, without a doubt. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that are doing really well through these times, right?
Yeah.
When you can't travel, when you can't go anywhere, when you can't do anything, but you can sit on your computer and you can buy a car or two or three. There's people doing that. I mean, they sell 50 cars a day.
Yeah. Well, we've had Randy on the program, a fascinating individual as well,
Oh yeah.
at a time when they've seen a meteoric rise. Yeah, I agree.
So, as far as how it makes me feel that things like Geneva aren't around, certainly I'm saddened by it, but there's going to be other things. There always will be. There's always innovators out there, always.
Well, speaking of innovation and COVID, you used COVID to do something that I think you really wanted to do for a long time, and this is a trend that's going around the country,
Hmm.
which is this sort of these well, what would you call them? They're not man caves because that doesn't sound very
Hate that.
appropriate. I don't like the term at all, Gordon. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
But it is a place for you to store your car and to create a wonderful space around all of the things that are car related, and you've done that right near where you're or right where you're sitting now.
Yeah, yeah,
Tell me a
no.
little bit about the development that you did.
Well, I got involved with a handful of partners, some really great guys, really good friends. We'd been after this for quite some time. There was a prime piece of property that happened to be owned by a family that I went to school with here in town. It was just a wonderful piece of property, 7 acres, that was on the market for a long, long, long time. And usually there's a reason why. It's usually either a toxic waste dump or it's overpriced, right? So the magic word came to effect, which was divorce. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, okay, well, now this makes sense. So anyway, we jumped on the property and we came up with this idea. Like you said, Jason's very popular, these quote car condos. The whole man cave thing, that word she shed and man cave, I don't know. I hate that image
Yep.
right. But the idea of a car condo, I mean, that's kind of another, but it is technically, they are
Car
condos.
condo. I like that. A car
Yeah.
condo.
So yeah, so there's spaces that you own, and I don't have anything to sell because we're sold out. So this is not a salesman talking right now. The idea that you can own your own space, put it in put it on the plus side of your asset sheet. There's huge tax advantages to that versus paying someone else's mortgage in commercial rent, right? So the thing that got us, we were about 40 or 50% committed when the shutdown hit. We've got 90,000 square feet, 4 separate buildings, different size units. So here we were about halfway committed, and then the shutdown hits, and we're like, okay, guys, we need to keep some powder dry because we have no idea what the future holds, like anybody, right? When things got sketchy.
Yep.
What happened with us, thankfully, is it skyrocketed the other way. People were able to work from home. So the reality is, and I'll just use one of our owners as an example without mentioning names, but one of the vice presidents at Facebook, who's got a second home in the Monterey Peninsula, these people are bailing out of the San Francisco area like crazy. The big cities were just emptying.
Great migration, right?
So they're coming to places like Monterey where they can own a beautiful home and be outdoors and have some space around them, and it's not the city life. Well, they still work, but do they want to work at home where the kids and the dogs and the distractions are? No. They'd like a space where they can have a professional presence, do their video conferencing, and maybe a place to keep their cars and stuff, and that's exactly what happened with us. And so we've got multiple CEOs of major companies that bought units from us. What is really the most fun underlying aspect of all of this is this community, this ecosystem that we have here now. Everybody kind of minds their own business, but we've also got, world champions here. We've got, everybody's doing their own thing, but we're not under one roof. We're under one roof technically, but everybody's got their own space. And the fact that you can own it and write it off, I'd love to be able to do it again, but with what's going on right now, I think we're gonna be content with what we've got. So it's worked out real well.
Incredible. And I mean, we've, as I mentioned earlier, I've seen this phenomena pop up across the country. What's going on in Palm Springs,
Oh
as
yeah,
an example, and very exclusive
yeah,
car condos that are owned and exclusive access and
yeah.
taking specialty cars around tracks like that.
Yeah.
It is really something else, truly something else that had not been conceived until now.
Well, it is. And one of the things I opted out of, because you'll find most of those spaces, such as thermal you're referring to, and some of these other places, they have a lot of common area space for people to have, conference rooms, and, you can have little events, whatever. I opted out of that here. I just kind of come from that school of, just the people that I know, and granted, I have to say I've brought most of my friends to the table here. They belong to the clubs they want to belong to. They're not looking for another club to, they don't. I didn't want to put something on the space you'd end up paying for and not using, which is often the case. And so we just kept it where, hey, just buy the amount of space that suits your needs and go from there. So it's been real good. Really, really grateful for it.
Well, wonderful. You mentioned owning the 911 at 19 years old. Tell me a little bit about what you have in your own personal fleet. I mean, this show is about not only culture here, Gordon, but
Okay.
also cars.
A couple car stories. Well, so I'm all over the board when it comes to.
Okay.
I just am. Yeah, like I said, I've been a Porsche guy. I had an Irish Green 911S when I was 19, and I'd actually sold my 510 Datsun. So here at 16, I paid $1,200 for a Datsun 510, a two-door, and turned it into a clone to a car that I'd read about in Motor Trend magazine that Pete Brock had built called the Screaming Yellow Zonker. It was basically a street version of a 2.5 Trans Am 510 challenge car. And so I replicated that car at a really young age and drove it around for a few years and sold that. So I bought it for $1,200. I sold it for $8,000, which was it kind of woke my eyes up to, wow, you can actually, if you do it well, you can do
Yes.
the leapfrogging thing, which I've kind of done my entire life when it comes to cars and bikes. So I sold that car and bought an Irish Green 911S, and that really introduced me to the world of Porsche. And I just, being 6'5", I've always loved those cars. I've never had the seat all the way back. The Germans have something about ergonomics that they've got figured out really, really well. So I've got a 2015 911 that's my daily driver. Manual gearbox, no sunroof, modeled after a car. My last consignment when I was running Christie's was the Steve McQueen Lusso, which was that crazy metallic brown, which you just think would not work on a Ferrari, right? I fell in love with the color though. I really did. So that's the color of my 911, which is a little unusual. Most of them are silver, but that's a daily driver. I never had a fast car in high school. Again, I was limping around on a Honda CL90 and then a Datsun 510. So I was never a guy with a cool car in high school, but I always admired the guys that had the Z28s and the Mustangs and all the rest of it. So I do have a 72 Z28, which Camaro, which is really, it's just a whimsical car. Those things just make you smile, they really do. Silver with white interior, white stripes, completely stock, except I did put Hotchkiss springs on. I lowered it a little bit. Those cars sit a little high. That was the look in the 70s, they sat a little high. But I later learned, I didn't know this at the time. I bought the car because I liked, and I've had it forever, but I just kind of like the looks of it. But that is another thing about that styling, the Gen 2 Camaros. I really like the 69Zs, but to me, $175,000 for a Camaro, that doesn't resonate with me. So it seemed like the Gen 2s were a better value. But when you look at the car, there's a lot of European styling. I think Bill Mitchell, that was kind of his push to his design teams. He was very inspired by Daytonas and a lot of Pininfarina work. And when you look at that car, you can kind of squint and use your imagination, and you can kind of see what's going on in terms of the European influence. But they also only made 2,300 of them. There was a UAW strike in '72, so they didn't make a lot of them, which is kind of fun. But I've also got a '72 Datsun 240Z, which is the car I always wanted. When I was 16, I wanted a Z, but I could only afford a 510. But when you put the Z28 and the 240Z together, there's a tale of two Zs there that is really remarkable because they have very similar lines. And it's interesting. So clearly, the Japanese were inspired by the Pininfarina designs as well. Long hood, sloped rear window, pronounced three-quarter haunch on both. It's really fascinating. So two fun cars that are just kind of a hoot. I've got a little 280 SL. That's actually my wife's car, a little 4-speed 70. She loves that thing. And then a lot of old motorcycles.
Yeah, how many of those do you have, Gordon?
I guess I might be down to about 20 now. I did sell a few last year. So, everything from Vincent Black Shadows to Norton Manx's, Triumphs, everything under the sun. I love riding motorcycles. I really do. I ride every week. I'm a fair weather rider. I don't mind getting caught in bad weather, but I won't set out in it. But I enjoy riding. I always have. It's really fun.
What does success look like for you when we get to the end of Car Week?
No real bad landmines. It's all about preparation. There's always going to be surprises. You have no idea what they're going to be. I kind of live in that mindset of plan B. You spend the entire year planning things as best you can, and it's inevitable that something comes up that didn't quite work out right. It usually comes down to, someone or some company didn't quite do exactly what they were supposed to, and you have to figure out how to fix that. As far as success, it's really neat when come Monday, you can hear people talking about how much fun they had at Car Week. That's really satisfying, and that involves people that experienced a lot of different events during the week. It's heartwarming being local and having a hand in this. For me, the ultimate success comes kind of around this time or maybe even earlier in the year when I run into people elsewhere that talk about various things that happened to them when they were at Car Week in August.
Sure.
I get that recap of, I don't know if I ever told you this, but I ran into so-and-so at the Quail and we're building a house together now, or, or some crazy. Again, it's kind of that one degree of separation. The stories are just remarkable to me, and I love them. I love
Matchmaking of the stories. Well, and I would give you one more, that if on Monday that you could, if those could talk about the spirit of the Quail, wouldn't that be appropriate?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And there is a spirit there. There really is. It's our chairman, Sir Michael Kaduri, is one of the most passionate car enthusiasts I've ever known in my life. He's an incredible man. His entire family, the entire leadership team at Peninsula Hotels, it's the only hotel business of its kind where every hotel is a 5-star, which is pretty remarkable. Those are some pretty high standards. And it's amazing that show is considered a Peninsula hotel event. That says a lot.
It's
It's
very
a lot
remarkable.
of the team that puts it together. Yeah, they're
Well,
incredible.
you and the team there are the keeper of the flame. We appreciate it. We are so happy to see the 19th version of the Quail, along with a host of other events at Car Week, take place. Gordon, thank you so much for sharing your story here on the program today, and best of luck as you set off into what is another historic month in the Monterey Peninsula for you.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for your interest. It's really great to talk with you again. It's been a while. I need to
Been a
stay.
while. I will see you soon.
Looking forward to it, Jason. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
The automobile is one of the most important inventions that revolutionized the modern world. In America, the rich history of car culture runs deep as technology continues to shape the future of the industry. Jason Stein,
former publisher of Automotive News,
is here to share the stories of people passionate about cars, from industry leaders and innovators to car-obsessed celebrities. Buckle up as Jason takes you inside the boardroom, onto the track, and around the bend on Cars and Culture on SiriusXM Business Radio.